Many things that Jesus did when he's here that's going to give us an idea of what we're going to be like. He walked, he talked to people, he knew people. He fixed the disciples' fish at one time. He walked through doors. He did all of those things. And, sometimes when people, you get to talking about what's going to happen way out there in eternity, they come up with they're going to be floating around on a cloud playing a harp. And that's the furthest thing from it. I personally think that in the end, that we're going to go back to Genesis basically, and I guess that's why I spend so much time there. But in Genesis, they had work to do. God had a job for them. In Genesis, there was a tree of life. In Revelation, there's a tree of life. In Genesis, there's a river. In Revelation, there's a river. So there's a lot of things that you can look at Eden and say that was God's plan for Eden. And if it was God's plan for Eden, could it not be also his plan for eternity? And so we need to think about those. Okay, so we've talked about spirits and body. It's hard to put body in the middle. So what's left? The soul. Now the soul is probably the most confusing thing that you can talk about. Nathan, would you like to give your rendition of what you think the soul is? Okay, the mind, will, and emotions. Can you go further than that? It's who we are. See, the Old Testament talked about souls, and it was a little bit different than the New Testament. The New Testament, when you see soul, you usually think of your psyche, and that's your mind and your will and your emotions. In the Old Testament, they use soul as a person. And even now, we do sometimes. How many of you watched Titanic? And what did it say it went in the water? 1,174 souls. And how many times do you hear people say, well, that person is my soul mate? So soul is a lot of things, and when you get to thinking about it, it's really probably the hardest to describe because it does deal with things. It does deal with the mind, will, and emotion. And when we think about things that the mind can do, I looked in the concordance, and let me just tell you some of the things the Bible says the mind can do. It says it can change. It says that it's devotion to and with a willing mind, so it can have a devotion. It says, my mind, examine my heart. Tell him your mind is steadfast, with all your soul and with all your mind. Be one in heart and in mind. The sinful mind is hostile to God. No man has conceived. The Spirit prays, but my mind is unfruitful. Be of one mind. Their mind is on earthly things. Your mind, mind your own business. That's actually in there. And the other one is change your mind. And so that is some of the things your mind can do. Now, if you think about you, who are you? You said, Grady, it's who you are. All right? So your mind can be considered who you are. Is it your brain that considers who you are, or your mind? Where's your mind at? It's in your brain. Now, when somebody says they have lost their mind, what does that usually mean? It usually means they don't know who they are anymore. If the brain dies from all visible evidence, the mind has died. So the mind is something that is there. It's who you are. It's what you are. I used to struggle with what would happen when you died. The body goes to the grave, and the spirit goes to be with the Lord. But what happens to the soul? And I struggled on that, and one day it was one of those duh minutes that the Lord said, it has to go with your spirit, because your mind is who you are. I mean, it says we'll know each other in heaven if we get up there and we don't know. Now, what about your will? What is your will? You got some young kids. What is will? It's their personality. It's who they are. It's how they're made. It's how they execute things. And so, when you look at the will, there's always a bent toward a will, and we're always saying there's a strong-willed child. What about our will? How strong is our will? If I said that our will was the strongest force in the universe, would some of you cock your head sideways? Yeah. On an individual basis, let me ask you how strong your will is. Can you subvert the will of God? What's His will? That He be saved, that we be saved. Is everybody saved? Why not? Because their will not allow that. And so when you look at that their will is set against God, I know that it's not stronger than God, but yet it doesn't allow God's will to come through. So it keeps the will from happening. Would you agree that our will usually is a result of our experiences? In other words, if your will is such that you're just not going to accept the things of the Lord, and you're not going to get saved, do you think that's based on an experience, that your will develops that? And I really don't know the answer to that, but here's what I know, that our experiences affect our will. Our experiences affect our mind. So now y'all already said this a while ago, the mind is where? In your brain. Where's your will? I think it's in the brain. That's the only place I know for it to be, is in your brain. And so if your will is in your brain, then it's probably based on emotions and experiences as why your will is the way it is. Think of something that you have battled with and you know it's your will. I mean, if you'll be honest, you just know that I will not do that. And here's how you tell if it's your will or not. Catch yourself saying, I will not do that, or I will do that. And so when you start doing that, you see that that's where it comes from. So your will is in your mind, and your will is based on experiences. Now what about our emotions? We said that the three things that the soul was the mind, the will, and the emotions. And who in here knows what Brother Larry always said about feelings?
Don't go on your feelings.
Yeah, you can't go on your feelings.
If you did, you wouldn't do anything.
Right. And to a large degree, I think that's correct. And what that really should say probably is, don't let your feelings dictate you. But they do. And so our feelings are nothing more than our emotions. And from what we have done over the last 15 years dealing with emotions, probably could spend the whole time dealing with emotions. And one of the things, don't always do it, but a lot of the time we do it, when we bring someone into Sunlight, we give them this sheet. Now I know you can't read the words, But you can see the columns. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 columns of about 40, so there's probably about 130 different emotions on this sheet. And these emotions are emotions that different people, not necessarily all psychologists, matter of fact, this list comes from a ministry, but these emotions are things that people feel. And you'll notice out beside each of these emotions is numbers. And those numbers go from 1 to 8. And there's another form that you can take, and those 8 different numbers equate to something. And then all of these emotions tie into those 8. Everything from shameful to tainted to, I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but those are tied together into 8 categories of emotions that people feel. So, if we are driven by emotions, how strong are those emotions? How strong are those beliefs that we have? If you have a belief, regardless of where you got that belief, that you're a failure, how much does it affect your life? Now, how many people can say, oh, you're not a failure? Buckle up. Why do you feel that way? Don't go on your feelings. You're not a failure. But what happens the next time you do something that doesn't go exactly right? What is the feeling that comes up? I'm a failure. So see, failures are very important. I've always said if you believe something strong enough and long enough, it's who you become. It really does. And so if you believe that you are worthless, a lot of the people we see in Sunlight, a common lie is worthless. And so what is so bad about that particular lie is if you feel worthless, can you go before God? Because you think yourself worthless. Why would God accept me, a worthless person? And so until you deal with those lies of feeling worthless, where you can come with common ground, then you're going to deal with that. You're never going to be able to live up to your Christian what? Potential. There you go. Thank you, Ryan. You're not going to live up to your Christian potential. And one of the things I will say is about halfway through, so 7 years ago, one of the things that we saw and we tried to move Sunlight toward is to helping people reach their Christian potential. And we got to having a stream of people come in, and we had a group of ladies come in from a church here in town, and they were just telling one another, and they were coming. And why they were coming is, I don't feel that I have a good relationship with Christ, and I don't know what's keeping me from having that. And as we went through, they identified the reasons that they did, and most of them got help. But every one of them said, I can't be who I need to be for Christ if I believe this about me. And one of the common beliefs was worthless. And so more than one of them said, if I feel I'm worthless, how can I go before God? I believe He won't accept me. And so those lies just continued to build on them. Think about this. The mind is a wonderful slave, but a horrible master. What if God put His Spirit in us, and we read a while ago that He did, if God put His Spirit in us, who should be guiding us? Our spirit. But who guides us most of the time? The soul. And so there's that constant battle between the spirit and the soul. But yet, we should all be letting the Spirit guide us. And so the mind is a wonderful slave, if you can make it the slave, but it's a horrible master. And I think one of the things that Christianity has happened today, it's happening in Christianity today, is that we have got to the point that our soul controls more of us than our spirit does. And So one of the ways we get around that is found in Romans 12. Anybody know what it is? Verse 2. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's where it's got to be. If we're going to start with this, we've got to renew our mind, and we've got to change the things in our mind that we allow to dictate who we are and how we act. And we have to do that and get that spirit that's back in control. So, next week, I'm going to look at something that's going a little bit more in depth on this, not renewing your mind, but it's the same vein. How many of you remember back in 2006 when we did Wednesday school? Only 3. Okay. Good. Remember that. We'll talk about that some next week. But Wednesday school was a good thing. It sort of played out, and that was a real sad thing, because what Wednesday school was is we had I don't know, probably 6 different classes, and each class had a different teacher and different subject. And Paul had a big class in the fellowship hall. There was like 5 upstairs, and so in those there were many different things that went on. Paul mainly was love, and you spoke a lot in Colossians, I think. Okay. Huh? Right. For most of that time, I taught a class too, and so I wouldn't be able to be in there that much. But I think the time I was in there, he was teaching in Colossians. So next week we'll sort of extend this on, but a little bit different vein. Anybody got any questions or comments? Right. Yeah, I did too, and I think a lot of people did. It's just like a lot of other things, commitment. People stopped coming so much, and we would start out with a good class and end up with not so many. But it was really a good time. It was a time that we got some in-depth teaching on different things. So, all right, any other questions or comments? Okay, prayer list. Ladies' Bible study.